Good evening. 6 days. That's all it took. 6 days after one Hindu man was lynched and burned in Bangladesh, another Hindu man was beaten to death by a mob. 6 days between Dipu Chandra and Amrit Mondal. And the question we must ask today is, how many more 6-day intervals before the world truly intervenes?
Today, we examine not just two individual tragedies, but a pattern that has persisted over 7 decades. We investigate not just mob violence, but the institutional responses that enable it. And we expose not just the killings, but the victim blaming that follows every single time.
This is not comfortable viewing. This is not easy listening. But it is necessary. Because when a community shrinks from 22% to less than 8% over 75 years through violence and forced migration, someone must bear witness.
This is the story of Dipu Chandra and Amrit Mondal, but it is also the story of 11.3 million people who left their homeland because staying meant living in fear. This is the story of Bangladesh's disappearing Hindu community and what happens when the world looks away.
Let's begin with the facts. December 18th, 2025, Bhaluka Mymensingh district. Dipu Chandra, a 27-year-old garment factory worker, was accused of making derogatory remarks about Islam.
What happened next was captured on video and shared across social media. A mob gathered. They beat him. They beat him to death. Then they tied his lifeless body to a tree near the Mymensingh highway, and they set it on fire.
The Bangladesh Rapid Action Battalion later stated that no clear evidence of blasphemy had been found. Dipu Chandra was already dead. His body already burned beyond recognition.
10 people were arrested. They expressed concern. International leaders condemned the violence. And then just 6 days later, it happened again.
December 24th, 2025, Hossain Danga village, Panksha Upazila, Rajbari district. Amrit Mondal, also known as Samrat, 29 years old, was beaten to death by a mob.
According to police reports, Mondal went to the house of a village resident named Shahidul Islam around 11 p.m. on Wednesday night. Allegations emerged that he was there to collect extortion money. An alarm was raised. Locals rushed to the scene. Mondal's associates fled. He was caught.
What happened next follows the same brutal script. He was beaten by a mob. He was reportedly found with weapons. Police arrived and rescued him in critical condition. He was taken to a hospital. Doctors declared him dead at 2 a.m.
2 men, 2 lynchings, 6 days apart. Both of them Hindu. Both killed by mobs. Both dead before any investigation, any trial, any semblance of justice.
But here's what's extremely disturbing about this pattern. After Dipu Chandra was killed, there was national and international outrage. After Amrit Mondal was killed, something different happened. The government issued a statement, and it wasn't an apology.
Hours after Amrit Mondal was lynched, there was a press release stating the following, and I quote, "According to police information and preliminary investigations, it is clearly evident that the incident is in no way related to communal violence or violence between communities. Rather, it arose from a violent situation stemming from extortion and criminal activities," end quote.
The statement continued, quote, "The deceased, Amrit Mondal alias Samrat, was a listed top criminal who had entered the area with an intent of collecting extortion money. At one stage, his life was lost during the clash with agitated residents."
Notice the language. Lost his life. Not was killed, not was beaten to death, but lost his life, as if it were an accident, a misfortune, something that just happened.
The statement went further to say that it has been noted with great concern that at the same time that a certain segment has been made with unholy attempt to highlight the religious identity of the slain person and describe it as a communal attack.
Let's pause here. They are condemning not the killing itself, but those who highlight the religious identity of the victim. This is a textbook victim blaming dressed up in bureaucratic language.
Now let's examine the claims. Was
by a mob.
in any functioning democracy, in any nation governed by the rule of law, alleged criminals are arrested, tried in court, and if found guilty, sentenced according to law. They are not beaten to death in the streets while bystanders film.
But here's the deeper issue here. By immediately focusing on the victim's alleged criminal background, the narrative is shifted from a man who was lynched by a mob to a criminal who got what was coming to him.
This is not the first time. This is a pattern. After nearly every attack on minorities in Bangladesh, statesmen always follow with a predictable formula. Minimize the communal angle, emphasize other factors, shift focus to the victim's alleged actions or background.
And this is not just in Bangladesh. In every place across the globe where Hindus are attacked, the narrative is just shifted away to victim blaming. In October of 2021, when Hindu temples were vandalized and Hindus were killed during Durga Puja, initial responses focused on the alleged Quran desecration that sparked the violence, not on the disproportionate violence against an entire community.
When the 2001 post-election violence saw 15,000 documented incidents against minorities, the government commissioned the Sahubuddin inquiry. To this day, 24 years later, the findings of that inquiry have never been made public.
This is the art of institutional victim blaming. Condemn the violence in abstract terms, express concern, then immediately shift the narrative to make it about something except systematic persecution.
To understand what is happening today in Bangladesh, we must understand what Bangladesh was, because this land was always a place where minorities live in fear.
Because the region that we now call Bangladesh was once the eastern heart of one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. The kingdom of Vanga, Gauda, and Samatata thrived here for thousands of years.
The Vanga kingdom, dating back to 700 BCE, as per known records, was known famously for its superior naval fleets and maritime supremacy. The civilization established settlements as far as the Maldives and Sri Lanka.
Bengal was also a major center of tantric tradition. The region was considered one of the most famous sacred centers for this spiritual practice in all of South Asia.
And the Sena dynasty, which ruled from the 11th to the 13th centuries, marked the last great Hindu kingdom of Bengal. The Sena kings patronized Sanskrit literature and created a flourishing Hindu culture.
Even in the medieval period, there was a unique synthesis. The 15th century saw the composition of the Kritibasa Ramayana. The Gaudiya Vaishnava movement, inspired by Saint Chaitanya in the 16th century, transformed devotional practices across the region.
This was a land of temples and scholarship, of spiritual traditions and cultural richness. As on now, in 2025, Hindu men are being lynched in the streets, their bodies burned, and the primary concern today is the mainstream media and all institutions involved are denying that religion had anything to do with it.
Let's talk about the numbers, because when institutions fail to tell the truth, numbers speak for themselves.
In 1951, according to the East Pakistan census, Hindus comprised of 22% of the population. In 1974, after a devastating 1971 genocide, they were still about 13.5% of newly independent Bangladesh. The 2022 census shows they are now just 7.95% of the population, less than 8%.
That's a decline from 22% to under 8% in 7 decades. We're talking about millions of people. Where did they go?
Dr. Abul Barkat, a Bangladeshi economist, conducted extensive research on this question. His findings: approximately 11.3 Hindus left Bangladesh between
11.3 million Hindus left Bangladesh between 1964 and 2013 due to religious persecution and discrimination.
And we're seeing continuously that this number is rapidly increasing in alarming rates.
Hindus across Bangladesh and across the globe are continuously facing persecution, and unfortunately, the world is not aware of it. It's going completely unheard, in silence. Now, this persecution of Hindus has been seen in nations across the globe. It is only because of their Hindu identity they are being attacked. However, this is being hidden from the public. And see, there are 632 Hindus leaving Bangladesh every single day for nearly 50 years, not for better economic opportunities, not for education abroad, but because of systematic oppression that made it impossible for them to stay.
But it's not just about people leaving. It's about what happens to those who stay also. After government fell in August of 2024, widespread attacks targeting Hindu homes, businesses, and temples had started. Over 2,200 incidents of communal violence against Hindus was reported in just 2024.
Between November 26, 2024 and January 25, 2025, just 2 months, there were 76 reported attacks on Hindus, resulting in 23 deaths and damage to 152 temples. 23
deaths. Not normal deaths. Deaths happened and resulted out of extreme violence. 152 temples damaged in just 2 months. And these are just the reported cases that made it into official statistics.
According to the Institute of Conflict Management, at least 34 instances of minority persecution occurred since August of 2024 alone.
The Open Doors International 2025 report on religious freedom in Bangladesh documents that Hindus face discrimination and violence as part of systemic Islamic oppression, often combined with institutional complicity.
These are not isolated incidents. This is not law and order problems. This is a pattern, a 7-decade pattern of a community being systematically driven from their ancestral homeland.
How does a community shrink from 22% to 8%? It doesn't happen by accident. There are systematic mechanisms at play.
First, land grabbing. After the 1965 India-Pakistan War, Pakistan enacted the Enemy Property Act, allowing the government to confiscate property from individuals deemed enemies of the state, primarily targeting Hindus.
When Bangladesh gained independence in 1971, instead of abolishing this discriminatory law, they renamed it as the Vested Property Act and continued to enforce it.
According to research, this law has been used to confiscate an estimated 1.6 million acres of land belonging to Hindu families. That's not a typo. 1.6 million acres.
The second mechanism, blasphemy laws and their misuse. Allegations of blasphemy, often unverified, sometimes fabricated, are repeatedly used as justification for mob violence. By the time the truth comes out, the damage is irreversible.
Third, the failure of law enforcement and judiciary. According to reports, more than 20,000 cases of atrocities against minorities are still pending in Bangladeshi courts. 20,000 cases.
And fourth, the silence and concealment of truth. After 2001 massacres, during the Sahabuddin Commission inquiry, the findings were never made public. After the October 2021 Durga Puja attacks, writs seeking judicial inquiry were filed. but the responses were continuously postponed.
And fifth, institutional victim blaming, which brings us back to Amrit Mondal. Even when the violence becomes undeniable, the response is to shift the blame to the victim, to focus on their alleged criminal record, their alleged actions, anything except the mob that killed them.
At this point, we must ask a very difficult question. If this persecution has continued for over 75 years, why has the world remained largely unaware until recently?
The answer leads us to one name, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nityananda Paramashivam.
The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is the first and only Hindu spiritual leader in recorded history to systematically bring international attention to the continuous civilizational persecution of Hindus, not as isolated riots, but as spanning over 2 millennia.
Through formal representations to United Nations mechanisms, international human rights bodies, and sovereign states, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has presented evidence that Hindu persecution did not end with medieval invasions, but continued through colonial laws, post-colonial state policies, and modern legal systems.
On December 31st in 2018, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism took the unprecedented step to re-establish and publicly declare the revival efforts of KAILASA, documented today as the world's only revived Hindu nation, and a civilizational safe haven for persecuted Hindus worldwide.
For the first time since the destruction of 56 ancient Hindu nations, a sovereign Hindu civilizational entity was reasserted, not through violence, but through international law, diplomacy, and spiritual governance.
But history shows us a troubling pattern. Those who expose persecution often are the biggest targets themselves of the persecution.
The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism himself was a target of systematic persecution, and despite this, has brought international attention to the Hindu genocide by reviving KAILASA. Multiple assassination attempts, illegal arrests, later declared unlawful by courts, custodial abuse and medical torture, attempts at poisoning, destruction of evidence, gag orders to silence testimony, and deep state-backed media vilification.
One high court ruling explicitly termed that the illegal arrest of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was in fact illegal, without authority, and contrary to the law. Yet no accountability has followed.
Due to repeated attempts on his life since 2009, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was forced to remain in exile when a persecuted community finally finds a voice powerful enough to reach the world. That voice is often the first to be silenced.
So where is the accountability? When 2 men are lynched 6 days apart, who is responsible? When the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is continuously persecuted for 15 years and with absolutely no support at all, who is held responsible for this?
It's the case of Dipu Chandra. 10 people have been arrested. In the case of Amrit Mondal, 1 person, his alleged associate Mohammed Salim, has been arrested, and firearms were recovered.
Arrests are important, but they are reactive, not preventive. They come after the violence, after the death, and after the body has been burned or buried.
What about the climate that makes such violence possible? What about the institutional failures that allow mobs to form, to attack, to kill, with the confidence that they can film it and share it online?
What about the government responses that immediately shift to victim blaming rather than addressing the systematic nature of the violence?
And instead, in the 5 months since August 2024, we have seen over 2,200 incidents of communal violence, 23 documented Hindu deaths, 152 temples damaged, and 2 lynchings in 1 week, followed by a statement of denial.
When the United Nations Human Rights Office released a report on Bangladesh in February 2025, it documented human rights violations under the last few years. What exactly has happened?
In other words, despite time, the pattern still persists. The question is, why?
What needs to happen? What will it take to break this cycle of violence, of victim blaming and impunity?
First, we need to acknowledge the ongoing persecution of Hindus across the globe and within Bangladesh. This is not about isolated incidents of law and order problems. This is about a community which is shrinking across the globe, especially in Bangladesh, from 22% to less than 8% of the population, through systematic violence, discrimination, and forced migration.
Second, we need to end the victim blaming. Whether Amrit Mondal had a criminal record is irrelevant to the fact that he was beaten to death by a mob. Alleged criminals deserve due process, not lynching. The government's immediate response is accounted into the fact, and we must condemn mob violence.
And this is not just about these two individuals in the mob, but those who create the climate of impunity. The 20,000 pending cases must be expedited. And we need to make sure that the public knows about this, that the global Hindu diaspora is aware about the ongoing persecution across the globe. And we need to bring international pressure, and this through global institutions and actively monitoring the situation. We need to bring awareness through media, social media, and ensure that Hindus and people across the globe know about this, are aware of this, and are voicing out about this human rights violation.
Finally, education and awareness. The next generation of Bangladeshis must learn the full history on their land, including the contributions of Hindus to Bengal's culture, literature, and civilization.
You cannot hate what you understand. You cannot burn temples when you know that they stood for centuries as centers of learning and art. You cannot lynch your neighbor when you recognize their humanity.
This is not about communal problems. This is not about one country versus another. This is about human rights and the universal principle that one deserves to live in safety regardless of their faith.
Dipu Chandra should be alive today. He was 27 years old, a garment factory worker contributing to Bangladesh's economy. He had a wife and a child. They are now without a husband and a father.
Amrit Mondal should have faced trial if he was indeed a criminal. He was 29 years old. Criminal or not, he deserved due process under law, not death judged by a mob.
The 11.3 million people who left Bangladesh should have been able to stay in the land of their ancestors. The 152 temples damaged in just 2 months should still be standing.
We cannot change the past, but we can choose not to repeat it. 6 days between 2 lynchings is too short. But even 6 months would be too short. Even 6 years would be too short.
The only acceptable timeline is no more lynchings, no more mobs, no more burning bodies, no more victim-blaming statements, no more violence disguised as law and order problems.
The world is watching. History is recording. The question before us is simple. Will we stand for justice and human dignity, or will we look away while this pattern continues?
Dipu Chandra and Amrit Mondal cannot speak for themselves anymore. So we, as KAILASA, must speak for them. We must bear witness. We must demand accountability, and we must never, ever look away.
For our viewers, we have provided sources and references for all of the information presented tonight. And we encourage each and every one of you to educate yourself further and read more, learn more, and speak up to those who make us live in silence, in fear.
From all of us here, we thank you for watching, and do take a moment to subscribe so you can continue to watch more content, learn more about Hindus across the globe who are facing persecution, who need a voice. And do share and like this video. May we all have the courage to be on the right side of history. Thank you and good afternoon.